one.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Board of Education Curriculum Committee meeting. We have a wonderful meeting in store for us this morning. Our subject today is social emotional learning, and we have Stephanie Allen, the Director of Pupil Personnel, and Kitty Klein, the Director of Guidance. And of course, we have Dr. Mioli, our Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum. We will be taking questions and comments from the public. You can email them to BOE@portnet.org. And when we get to the end of the meeting, we will read anything out loud and answer them. We are sticking just to our topic of the day, which is social emotional learning, but please feel free to email any questions or comments that you have. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Mioli to introduce our subject.
Good morning, and thank you. So our subject today this is actually my first board curriculum committee meeting, and it's no coincidence that the topic is one that I think is of utmost importance, particularly in this time, and that is social and emotional learning. And this is, in some ways, this is kind of a personal goal for me, and it was an easy one for us to choose. I think the board, the superintendent, and I feel very strongly that this is a really integral part of all of our students' learning, and so we're happy to start with that topic this morning. So if we can put up our PowerPoint. I know our guests have already been introduced, and I just want to say that we're very happy to have both Dr. Allen and Ms. Klein here with us today. Dr. Allen, who, as you may know, wears about 25 hats these days, does have a prior engagement, so she'll be, if she disappears from the screen for a while, you'll know why. But actually, she is going to start our presentation. We're going to do an overview of the state. You can go to the next slide. We can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Dr. Allen's going to do an overview of the work that's been done in New York State. Ms. Klein will do an overview of CASEL, which is an international group that has been working with social and emotional learning for decades, actually. And then I'm going to talk about a particular approach to social and emotional learning, which has been going on in parts of the district, and that I look to have as one of my first initiatives here in Port Washington moving forward. So I will introduce Dr. Allen, who will begin.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Mioli. Hi, everybody. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Dr. Allen. I'm the Executive Director for Pupil Personnel Services here in Port Washington. And then the other side, when it comes to SEL, I'm also a psychologist. So this is a topic near and dear to my heart as well. So just to put everybody kind of on the same playing field with this, we talk about SEL, you'll hear that a lot. And that is the acronym for social emotional learning. And so what is that? What exactly does that mean? So we use basically we use the definition put out by CASEL in 2015, which I'll just go through quickly with you. And I highlight the word process, and I'll talk a little bit about that. It's the process through which our children, youth, adults acquire and effectively apply knowledge, attitude, skills necessary to understand and manage our emotions, set and achieve positive goals, and feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. So this is everything about our emotional quotient. Sometimes you'll hear IQ and EQ. Who are we emotionally? How do we develop these skills? How do we display these skills? How do we let people know that we empathize with them, that we share a common view, or that we can respectfully agree to disagree in certain situations? How do we regulate all of that? The reason I highlight the word process is there's no one way to do this. And just like learning is a process, this is a process. Developing our emotional quotient is also a process. Why is this important to us? First of all, overall, good social emotional well-being. We have greater well-being. We do know lots of research shows that it leads to better school performance. Our students are more engaged in school. A reduction in overall emotional distress. People that have good emotional skills, emotional regulation, can have and manage stress well. And it also improves our school connectedness, not only between students, but between students and their teachers, staff and staff. We want to make sure that everyone's connected overall. Okay. So this is not a new concept. New York State did put out some guidance for us back in 2018 and really gave us a direction in terms of how to make this happen. They came out with their benchmarks in August of 2018, and we'll go through the benchmarks in a few minutes. But these are for students in grades K through 12. So they broke it down. What are the skills you need starting in kindergarten? And it grows on them through the end of high school. The goals of they gave us 3 benchmarks, and again, we'll go through those in a minute. The first one is really to develop self-awareness and our self-management skills. The second is to use social awareness and interpersonal skills to establish and maintain positive relationships. And then the third is to demonstrate ethical decision-making skills and responsible behaviors. Okay, so this is just an example of the template and what it looks like. I kind of paraphrased the 3 goals for us there, but I won't read them to you, but you see them in a little bit more detail. And again, it's all about being successful, being positive, getting through to what we need to do in life, making good decisions, being ethical, and
Sorry, we just need the slide changed, John, please.
Yeah. Okay, so this is an example of the benchmark page, and one goal in particular that Dr. Mioli picked out when we were putting together the presentation was goal number 2, and that's using that social awareness and interpersonal skills to establish and maintain positive relationships. And if you look at what they have on the grid here, it shows you the grade levels and then what the skill is at that particular grade level. The state's broken it kind of into these age bands for us. And if you see, early elementary is K through 2, late elementary is 4 and 5, middle school obviously 6 through 8, early high school is 9 and 10, and then ending or late high school is 11 and 12. You have to have developed all of those skills. They build on one another. So if we look at that first piece there of recognizing feelings and perspectives of others, if you look at high school, I'll just use the first one as an example, demonstrate how to express understanding of those, I'm sorry, I can't read it, who hold different opinions. You have to have developed all of those other skills in those earlier grades before you can really develop that one. So that's how they've broken it apart for us. Okay, next slide. Okay, so just to go a little bit more in detail with each of the goals like that I mentioned before, what do we want for our students when they graduate high school? Starting from the beginning, where are we taking them? So for that first goal, we want them to understand their emotions. We want them to understand how to manage those emotions and how to express them constructively. That's a big thing. Labeling emotions, making sure they can express how they feel, telling us how they feel. At the younger grades, we'll often tell children, use your words, tell us how you feel. And we want to help them label those emotions. We want them to know how to react to stress and control those impulses, you know, especially again, younger kids, they're very quick to jump and do something. They don't have the language skills, those impulses do come out. But through the process of teaching them about their emotions and what that means, we also teach them to control that piece of it and that there's a more constructive way for them to respond. We want to help them to be motivated to persevere in difficult situations. You know, there's certainly things that are going to present as problems to us. How do we solve them? How do we get through them? How do we persevere? We want them to learn how to accurately assess their abilities, their own abilities, their interests, and then build upon their strengths to achieve their goals. We want them to have a good idea of who they are, what they can do well, and how do we build on those strengths. And then really important is we want them to make use of all, and I put that in all capitals on purpose, all available supports and resources. There's a lot of research out there about the idea of having social supports. Just knowing that you have social supports in and of itself helps in difficult situations. Whether or not you use those resources is something totally different, but knowing that you have them, knowing they're available to you, it really is a part of the, is half the battle, okay? Goal number 2, That was the one we highlighted on the slide before, but we want our students to be able to recognize their thoughts and feelings. There are connections to those. One is what we think about something. The other is how we feel about that situation. What's the emotional response to our thought? So today's a rainy day out. That's my thought. It's a rainy day. How do I feel about that? It makes me feel not so great because it's raining out. We want kids to know those the differences between the two. We want them to be able to recognize the perspective of other people. We have thoughts about things, but so do other people, and we want them to be able to recognize that. Showing empathy towards others, and especially those from diverse backgrounds. Empathy is a huge area of research also. Sympathy is that ability to be able to sympathize with someone, feel bad for them, encourage them, support them. Empathizing is the ability to really be able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and understand how they might be feeling. So taking on that other person's perspective. Empathy is another big one when we talk about SEL. We want them to also establish and maintain positive relationships. We want them to be able to cooperate, collaborate, and communicate respectfully. And also resolve conflicts constructively, and again, respectively. All through the process of empathy, being able to take their perspective and then communicate and resolve a problem constructively. In the last goal that the state has given to us for goal number 3, we want our students to make ethical decisions while taking others into consideration. Lots of research out there on what they call ethical dilemmas, where you can read a situation and how do you respond to that. That ability to make those ethical decisions in the long run also is a huge factor in SEL. We want them to accurately assess decisions that were going to be made when the decisions that you have to make when you're trying to solve a problem, breaking that problem down into steps. Every problem has multiple layers. Solving each one of those steps, we want them to learn. Generate alternative solutions.
Sorry, can we just
Yeah.
have the, sorry, Stephanie, we just
That's
want
okay.
the slide forwarded again, please.
No, we were on the right slide.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I did that twice to you?
No, just the once. We're
Okay.
good. Yeah, that's okay. We want them to generate alternative solutions to problems. Very rare that a problem will have a single solution. There's always different ways to solve a problem and come at a problem. Some are more constructive than others. We want our kids to learn to be assertive about something, not aggressive, and that's part of the teaching about problem solving. We want them to learn to anticipate consequences of each potential solution. That's another huge one. Consequential thinking skills are huge. They really need to be able to understand the impact of every decision they made. And that ties a little bit back to what I mentioned before with impulse control. We're quick to do something, but we haven't thought through what's the consequence of really is going to happen in this situation. And before we make a decision, we want to know what the consequences could be. And then at the end, we want them to be able to evaluate and learn from the outcomes of their decisions. Sometimes here, in the office, we'll talk about having a post-mortem. Okay, this is what happened. Let's talk through how it went and what we could do differently next time this situation presents itself. And we want our students to learn that as well. All right. How do we do all of this in the schools? So many of you have heard some of these terms already, but just to, again, kind of lay it all out for everyone. It's called a multi-tiered system of support. The big one most people have heard of, especially with the schools, is RTI. We talk a lot about RTI, and that really is our response to intervention approach to helping with academic problems. But there is also the positive behavior interventions and support piece, PBIS, which deals with emotional and behavioral concerns. How do we teach our kids through that? And there's 3 tiers to MTSS. The first tier is what we call universal design. It's universal interventions that's available for all students. These are done at the classroom level. It's a proactive approach. I know later in the presentation, Dr. Mioli is going to go through the ruler program, which is used at SUSA. That's available to all students. It's universal design. Tier 2 is customized interventions. Now we've identified some students that are a little bit more at risk. What do we do in those situations? How do we take that universal piece and tweak it a little bit so that we can make sure that those students are learning what they need to learn in the situation? And then tier 3 is our individual interventions for those students that have not responded to those other 2 tiers. More often than not, especially in my world, those are the students that get referred to CSE for a whole host of reasons, not just academic reasons, but sometimes there's some emotional concerns and they need an individualized intervention. And we refer to this as the tertiary interventions. Okay, next. Many of you may have seen the triangle before. I know a lot of schools talk about it when we talk about RTI, but also is available when we talk about PBIS. So it's just a good graphic to show, everybody gets those universal designs, and 80 to 90% of people are going to respond to those. You're going to have about another 5 to 10% that need that secondary level of intervention. And then a really small percentage, 1 to 5% overall of your population, needs those higher level individualized approaches. Okay, so what's involved? I talked a little bit about this, but now we'll get a little bit more into detail. Each level reflects implementation of effective, efficient, and evidence-based practices and strategies that all students can access. Really important that they're evidence-based. The research has showed us that these interventions work, and that's why we want to use them. Each tier builds on the previous tiers. So you don't get to tier 3 without having gone through 1 and 2, because we want to try those things. We want to make sure that we're not putting students at a high level of need that really could learn at a secondary level, at that secondary intervention piece. Tier 1 is explicit instruction and SEL competencies for all students, and SEL is integrated into all areas, the classrooms, the special area topics, recess. It's part of the entire day. Everybody's involved. At tier 2, again, we talk about that targeted explicit instruction for an identified group of at-risk kids. At this level, now we're going to get involved with some of our other providers. Our school counselors are going to be involved, our social workers are involved, and psychologists that are really going to work with students on a little bit more in-depth instruction. And then if that doesn't work for a student, we go on to tier 3. This includes that individualized instruction, like I mentioned before, and it's targeted strategy and skill development. There's very specific things that we've identified that the student is not learning, and we target the intervention towards those skills. And it involves, again, specific practice and coaching. Oh, there you go, sorry. And at this level, again, it would be our school counselors, our social workers, psychologists, and in some instances, if we're talking about CSE, then we would be using outside agencies. Connected to all of this, in our schools, many of you may have heard about our instructional support teams. And that's really the team of professionals within the building. If we have a student, either academic concern or emotional concerns, we come, we talk about what's going on. If that tier 1 isn't working, what can we do at tier 2 for them? They come back, they assess what's going on. And if that's not working, do we need to bump it up to tier 3? And like I mentioned before, more often than not, that's when we're talking about a CSE referral. All right, and I'll turn it over to Kitty.
So let me just thank you, Dr. Allen, for that. And I just want to highlight 2 things. The first one's been said already, but I just want to reiterate it, and that is that New York State, we often talk about the state education department in not such wonderful terms, but they really have done a tremendous work with social and emotional learning. These are great documents. They've given us a lot to work with, and as you can see, in great detail. And so that's something that we have to work with. And the other is, I just want to reflect back on that triangle and just say, for those of you, who may not have thought about it this way before, that, we often think when we talk about school of the different academic supports that we have for kids, what happens in the classroom, how we differentiate, how we get them into, a service if we think they need it, reading or speech or something like that, if they need extra help. And then, to go into, possibly have an IEP and be in a special education program if they need particular supports. That same parallel engine exists in the schools and always has, but it's not as visible. And that's one of the reasons why it's so good that we're talking about this and we're putting so much importance on it. That same triangle of meeting the social and emotional needs of all students, most of the kids, most of the time in the classroom, and then having a second and third tier of support for students who really have social and emotional needs that go above and beyond We have had them in port for a long time, and we are refining how we deliver those services and integrating them into the academics, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So thank you again, Stephanie, and I'd like to introduce our Director of Guidance, Ms. Kitty Klein.
Thank you. So as Dr. Allen reviewed, the heart of support systems in place for students is the social emotional connection. And so I will be discussing the SEL framework by CASEL. So CASEL stands for the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, and it's based on 5 social emotional competencies: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. We are at this time grappling with an unprecedented set of circumstances as a result of the pandemic and its residual effects, such as even school closures, loss of instruction, routines, even school-based relationships. And with economic crisis and trauma and racial inequality, more now than ever, our children and staff and community members need to have the social emotional competencies developed. Next slide, please. As you can see, CASEL's framework for systemic SEL is connected to the 5 competencies which contribute to a thriving community. Now more than ever, our students need to develop these skills, and it is a collection of multiple stakeholders and constituents. Next slide, please. So CASEL's roadmap, REUNITE, RENEW, and THRIVE, was put together by 40 other organizations together, and they developed a roadmap to help support the planning of transitioning back to school. And built into this are the SEL supports, which are based on critical foundations and critical practices. The first is to take time to cultivate and deepen relationships, build partnerships, and plan for SEL. Design opportunities where students can connect, heal, and build their capacity to support students. Create safe, supportive, and equitable learning environments that promote all students' social emotional development. And to use data as an opportunity to share power, deepen relationships, and continuously improve support for students, families, and staff. Next slide, please. So I know this was reviewed by Dr. Allen, but I just would like to speak a little bit more about why SEL is important and why it's relevant. So the research, as mentioned before, it shows that student learning takes place when there is a sense of safety. And connected with senses of the sense of feeling safe is food, shelter, and as well as health. So once students feel a sense of safety, they then feel that their voice is safe to speak of and to start learning. There are many types of trauma that students may have experienced due to the pandemic. And we all know that trauma can affect students' mood, focus, and memory. And so, of course, learning might be, certainly an obstacle, or trying to learn is an obstacle as a result of some of the trauma experienced by students. When students are feeling safe, both physically and emotionally, they can certainly regulate their emotions, and then they're ready to learn. Next slide, please. So the first critical practice that CASEL hones in on is the importance of cultivating and deepening relationships. That includes fostering new relationships that elevate student and family voice. And this includes identifying some knowledge gaps to ensure that even distance learning plans are also culturally responsive and that they're meeting the needs of all learners. Utilizing two-way communication strategies is important because we need to reassure community members regarding the transition process for students, for parents, for adults, staff. Examine the impact of SEL efforts. We need to take a look at the resources available, checking in on students, checking in on adults to ensure that they feel a sense of feeling supported, and ensure that the resources that are leveraged really address all our community members. And building a coalition and maintaining a safe, supportive, and equitable environment for all students and adults is also an important piece to cultivating and deepening relationships, because we need to be able to solicit feedback from all constituents, including the marginalized groups, the students and the families that really were impacted by the pandemic. And some of the ways that we actually did solicit some of their feedback is through our committees, such as mental health, the instructional committee, health and safety, all part of the reopening plan. Next slide, please. So the second critical practice specifically, oops, could we go back, please? Thank you. So the second critical practice really focuses on the adults for the healing. It's important that adults model compassion as we adjust to the new reality, because when we're allowing a safe space for connection and healing among adults, then we are able to connect with our students and students feeling that they can share with us. So this really covers some of the areas of accessing mental health and trauma, identifying opportunities for innovation and anti-racist practices, and certainly providing professional learning. Staff should be able to access mental health supports, not just within the school, but within our community. And one of the ways that we're actually working to support our staff, this upcoming Tuesday, we were able to secure 2 prominent people in the mental health profession who'll be providing webinars on teacher wellness. It's also important that students, please go back, sorry. Thank you, that actually staff is able to reflect on some of the concerns and some of the things that they've learned through the pandemic, particularly through our distance learning, and being able to connect with students on how and what they went through as well. Next slide, please. So a third critical practice of promoting social emotional development for students is understanding that we need to build structures that promote the adult-student relationships. When we're building SEL relationships and we're providing a sense of security, students are able to build those coping skills and those resiliency skills. We want to weave in those opportunities for SEL practice, which reflect on those social emotional competencies, those 5 basic important pieces to student development. Implementing a system of support for students with additional needs. I think the pandemic was certainly an eye-opening for the district and for our community of some of the digital divide that took place for our students. Some students did not have access to a computer or internet. Some students, they come to school and they're getting a meal, and so the food resources were something that we needed to ensure that they were being met. And of course, there's additional concerns such as health. And so developing resources and resource pages within our district and at our buildings and disseminated to the community is another aspect of creating that system in place. Critical practice 3 also includes engaging students in developmentally appropriate conversations to discuss concerns and the impact of the pandemic on them, their communities, and the world. And that's extremely important because when students are able to identify with how they're feeling and really be able to connect with their experiences, not just what they went through, but others, they're able to develop meaningful relationships with other people, including adults, and collaborate with families to align strategies to support students. This is really a time where we need to empower educators and families and all constituents of alike to work together and to strengthen the connections that we have within the community. And some of the ways that I think we did a really wonderful job of this is through our community forums that were designed and set up, even our diversity committee, where we were able to obtain information about what's happening with our underserved or underrepresented population, our virtual school forum, and of course our town halls. Next slide, please. So the fourth SEL critical practice is really utilizing the data, using data to deepen our relationships and improve support. We know that when we utilize data to drive instruction, it really helps to identify areas of improvement. We want to allow students to have a voice. So by elevating their student voice on the data that surrounds their learning and engagement is really important. And some of the ways that we do this could be through Google Classrooms and Google Forms, individual student reviews where we meet with students and we talk to them about how they're feeling, how they're performing, as well as just weekly check-ins from the counselors, psychologists, social workers, and really coming together as a collaborative team. Critical practice 4 also talks about supporting educators in reflecting on instruction, especially when trying new strategies or modes of teaching. And I think this was a very big piece to our community and in the infrastructures of the buildings, where teachers were providing a robust learning experience in curriculum and having to understand that now not only are they delivering instruction in a traditional brick and mortar setting, but even before, when students were on remote, learning new digital platforms, learning the new technology, and trying to feel that taking those risks are where they will still feel supported. And in terms of utilizing data to deepen relationships and improve support, partnering with our families and our community members to improve experiences and outcomes is extremely invaluable. Families are children's first teachers. They're the ones who are teaching their children some of the basic things before they get into our brick and mortar schools. And they have expertise in areas. It could be cultural, it could be their values. And utilizing the data of where our community is and our parents and their beliefs as part of improving our instruction and connecting with students and families is at the heart of that. So as you can see, the SEL component really has a lot to do with not only the 5 SEL competencies, but really the CASEL'S program of those 4 critical practices. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Klein. If I may, before we go on, I just want to highlight a couple of things there as well. CASEL, as Kitty mentioned, is a collaborative for academic and social and emotional learning. And I think it's important, again, just to highlight that title, because this group's been around for a long time. They've done a lot of good work. And I think it's great that they have seen the connection between the two and how the one is often not possible without the other. Those of us who have a few more years in the system go back to Maslow's hierarchy, that you can't really, if you're a student, it's hard to learn if you're hungry. If you haven't had your basic needs met, it's hard to learn if you're depressed. And that hierarchy is, that you need to fulfill needs of both students and adults, starting at their most basic and then moving up that hierarchy. So the other thing I wanted to, and so what that means to us as educators is that we really need to know our students. We need to know who they are, where they're coming from, and we need to know, sometimes physically where they're coming from as well. What kind of situations are they coming from? Because we can't just assume that everybody in front of us is starting in the same place every day. And so this work has been really good. I did not include it in this presentation, but ASCD, which is probably the largest educational organization in the world, they have a whole initiative called The Whole Child, and it is similar to CASEL in that it does involve both academic and social and emotional learning, and the need for the two to work hand in glove to really reach students and have them succeed to their best ability. And the only other nexus I want to make here is Kitty had alluded to, under the critical practice number 2, I think it was, of identifying opportunities for innovation and anti-racist or culturally sensitive practices. And as I think many of you in our audience know, the board has made this one of their goals for this year as well. And there are obviously definite connections between social and emotional well-being and those types of practices as well. All right. I know I gave John trigger finger. I've stopped him twice. Sorry about that. But we'll just move on with me now. So you can go backwards and forwards at will, and I'll try to keep up with you. So I mentioned at the beginning that this was, a little bit of a personal thing for me. So it is for a couple of reasons. One, again, many in my generation and of my gender, when we talk about social and emotional learning, the emotional part, we didn't do feelings. We don't do that. And so, let me, full disclosure, say at the outset of going into my part, that, I approach this as a learner, not as an expert by any means. And most of what I'm about to present is largely the result of the work that was done at SUSE, and not by me, but by Jen Biblowitz and Nadine Fatoussi and Justine Koo, and all of the teachers there who have been working with this approach for a while. And so I think what I want to share with you is that we are embracing this approach, and I want to explain it and why I think it's such a good approach, and why it fulfills all those practices and needs that you saw in the first two presentations. Okay, John. Thank you. So RULER is an acronym. I'll get to it in a minute. The approach was created by Dr. Mark Brackett. He's at Yale. He's at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. And again, I know a lot of you out there will want to learn more about this than we have time to go into at this time. And Mark put out a book fairly recently called Permission to Feel. It's a great read, and it really goes into great detail into all of the, not only the pieces that you saw, but the RULER implementation, which I'm about to talk to you about. So I would recommend it highly. So when we talk about RULER and social emotional learning, this is a great quote that I think kind of captures all of what I'm about to talk about, that emotions matter. Maya Angelou said, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." And again, that goes back to what I was speaking about before in terms of knowing each other, teachers knowing students, students knowing teachers, and those relationships. Next. So RULER is an acronym, and it stands for recognizing, understanding, labeling, expressing, and regulating emotions. And each of those 5 skills is developed within this approach. And go to the next slide, please. I'll talk about each of them a little bit. So it involves those 5 skills, and also the use of 4 anchor tools to help students develop those skills. And I'm going to go through each of them individually: the charter, the mood meter, the meta moment, and the blueprint. So what I'd like you to do, if you have a phone with you, actually, I didn't go over this with John. We may have to go to another screen and open up the Padlet. But if you have a phone with you, you can put this site in, http://padlet.com/dmioli/BOE. And that will bring you to a Padlet where you can, John, can you click on that? Will that open up? I forgot to go over this tech part with him. I'm guessing no. All right. Let me check my email. All right. So I'm used to driving from here. Anyway, one of the things that we probably ask each other every day, all the time, how are you doing? And there's generally kind of 2 answers to that, okay or good, right? And that's about the extent of my emotional vocabulary up until about 5 years ago. I think it's up to about 4 words now. But if I were able to open up this Padlet, we would probably see lots of, I've done this in several other presentations, and it tends to be a fairly limited set of words that people respond to. It's a kind of a knee-jerk reaction, just a kind of thing that we do all the time. How you feeling? Okay. So if we can change the slide, I'll move on to the charter. So the charter is kind of just what it says. It's a piece of paper where we all agree whoever that population of people is, whether it's a classroom or a board of education or a faculty, we all agree on how we want to feel when we are in our environment and what we're going to do when we don't feel the way we want to feel. And let me show you some examples. So this is an example from Sousa. Mrs. Patuchek is a 4th grade teacher. And so I don't know how well you can see what's on there, but we would ask the teachers, we would ask the students, what can we do? What kind of feelings do we want to have in our classroom, which is the middle slide. And the students would come up with things that they, how they would want to feel in the classroom. And then we would talk with them about how what we can do to have these feelings in our classroom every day. So not just the theory of it, but what does that look like and what does that sound like? And then finally,
Dave.
Yeah.
Sorry, Dr. Amelia, I don't want to interrupt you, but I wanted you to know, because you can't see it, that people are using your Padlet. So I think that if you want to work it in, even though you can't see it, people are figuring out how it is because there are words popping up on it. You're muted now, I think.
Thank you. I'll try to open that up. Anyway, good. I'm glad if people can see that. Thank you for letting me know. So the third part, how do you feel? What does that look like? And what can we do to have each other have those feelings every day in the classroom? And then, how will we handle uncomfortable feelings and conflict? What happens when, those feelings that we want to have aren't there? So it's Stephanie, way back in slide 1, spoke about the process. And one of the things I really like about Ruler is it's a good deal of process. And the charter is the first step. So next slide. So here's just 2 examples. There are lots of them. And I just want to show you a digital one and an analog one. The one on the left, on my left, is a 4th grade, Mrs. Patuchek. So this is how it ended up. We, the 4th graders, will work together to create a classroom where everyone feels. The students came up with respected, confident, excited, accepted, and safe. And we will do this by saying hello when someone enters the classroom, giving compliments. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you can see how that flows and how the students own it, and it gives them something to do and something to think about. Again, not just the words themselves. And the example on the right is a kindergarten example, and it's an analog one that was hanging in the classroom. So the kids put it together, the teacher put it together after the kids had the same kinds of conversations. Next slide. So not only, the classroom's not the only unit, obviously, in a school. The staff is another unit. And again, as both Kitty and Stephanie described, the adult feelings are and sense of well-being is just as important as the students. In fact, as you'll see later, we are starting our trainings with all the adults before we start our trainings with the students, because if you think about it, that's probably the most important way to model for the students what we want them to know, do, and understand in terms of social and emotional learning. So again, I'm not going to read this. This will be, we're going to put the presentation up on the website, but it's the same kind of process. We got the staff together. We had everybody contribute to how they'd like to feel. And then we went on to describe what that looked like and what's going to happen, when those things don't happen. How are we going to manage that? And keep going, please. So that was anchor 1. Anchor 2 is the mood meter. And for those of you who are on the Padlet, this will have a little more relevance for you, I think, too. Next slide, please. So the mood meter is a kind of a really neat device that helps you chart your moods. And so the x-axis is the feeling of pleasantness from left to right. So all the way to the left on the blue is unpleasant, and all the way to the right on the green is pleasant. And then the up and down axis, the y-axis, is your energy level. So if you are having low energy but high pleasantness, you're all the way in the corner on the right bottom. If you are highly agitated and not happy, you are all the way at the top of the left-hand corner. And obviously there are gradients in between. And it's a great visual tool for, again, both kids and adults to really think about how they're feeling and what it's doing to your body on the y-axis and your thoughts on the x-axis. And it's kind of a nice way to conceptualize it for everyone. So this is a great tool, the mood meter. Next, thanks. So I'd like you to just do, I know it's hard to be interactive when we're virtual and we can't see or hear each other. But if you just think about monitoring your own feelings right now in terms of those two axes that I just talked about, where do you think you are on the mood meter? And what would be some emotions? What would be some words that might be included in the quadrant that you are? And if I had the Padlet up, we could go through that. But so then you start to try to think about, well, how do I put a word to how I'm feeling? Where do I place it on the mood meter, and how do I describe that other than good? I'm good. How are you? I'm good. Next slide. So here are some answers, and this is a tool, again, that we use with students to get them going, and with some adults like me, whose emotional vocabulary is still highly limited, even though I'm still working on it. So you see that all the way in the right-hand bottom corner, that very, very high sense of pleasantness and very low sense of energy is serene. And that box that I talked about before, very agitated and unpleasant, is enraged, all the way in the upper left-hand corner. So a lot of the training has to do with just vocabulary, having the kids and the adults learn how to describe how they're feeling. And again, it doesn't, we don't have just one feeling at a time. Often we have more than one. Next slide. Here's how Mrs. Biblowitz does it with second graders. She made little emojis with words, feeling words next to them, and she had them on their Chromebooks, drag them over to the appropriate quadrant. So again, it starts to have the kids think about how they're feeling and attach words to those feelings. Next slide. And then there is a whole, the ruler, because it's attached to Yale, and because it's been they've been doing this work for so long, well over a decade, they've developed a lot of instructional materials, which are really great. So there's a whole list of feeling words that have been developed that teachers can use in the classroom. And they're sorted out by lower, upper, and middle school, different levels, and by families. So I don't know if you can see it, but, family being kind of happy, what that looks like in kindergarten would be cheerful, and, what that might look like in the middle school in terms of developing a number of words in that same family. Next. So here's where the rubber starts to hit the road, and here's why this is in a curriculum committee meeting. So we start to talk about, okay, it's important for us to know the kids and for them to know how they're feeling and stuff, but how does it affect curriculum? So there's a couple of ways, and here's the first way. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. There are certain activities that are more, that are better served by different emotions. We don't always want kids to feel great. I mean, we do, but they're not always going to, and we need to tap into, some of the emotions that they're feeling at the time. And they also need to learn how to use those emotions or regulate those emotions in order to get through certain activities. So, for example, if you look at the green quadrant, that's again a serene and pleasant quadrant, and there are activities like making art that might be, or writing, that might be particularly well served in that quadrant. And if you look at the red quadrant, debate might be better served when you're a little more worked up, you have a little higher energy going, and things are not so pleasant. You're trying to get your points in. And so go to the next slide, and I think it gives us another view on this. So the ideal climate for learning is to take all those rainbow arches, which are all the different quadrants, and have, allow students to have those feelings. We don't want to force them to always be happy, but to tap into those emotions for different kinds of uses in the classroom, but to generally maintain a positive mood all day. So to keep things, generally in check, but to use the emotions to further thinking and learning. Next slide. Here's another way that that ruler is used in the classroom. If you think about it, when students read books, they want to empathize with characters. So the questions become, and once they start to develop a better vocabulary than I have, they can do this, and it also obviously increases their writing skills. So this is the book Wonder, and one of the activities going on here is charting where the characters are at a particular point in the book, and thinking about the characters' feelings and how that interacts with what's going on in the book and the development of the plot. Next. The third anchor is the meta moment. And the meta moment, this is a quote by Viktor Frankl: between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our freedom and the power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and freedom. So let me explain that a little bit. Here's a graphic. There you go. Thank you. So the meta moment is that time between when something happens to you and when you react. And in a nutshell, part of what we try to work with students on is developing skills in that meta moment, in that split second, so that we don't just react, but we think about how we react. And that bottom set of slides shows the character thinking about his best self, reaching into a toolbox to say, well, how can I handle this in the way that my best self would? And then having a more positive result because of that. Next slide. So here's just another visual of it. Bye, Stephanie. Thank you. This is just another visual of that. A stimulus and trigger. We take that meta moment. We think about it. Sometimes if we don't think about it, we have an ineffective response. But if we take the meta moment and we have some tools that have been developed, we can have a more effective response. And then finally, the blueprint, next slide, puts all of this together. There's your ruler acronym: recognizing and labeling, understanding, expressing, and regulating. And what this is basically is peer mediation. So it's not only how do I feel, but how did I make somebody else feel? And not only, what can I do to make this happen in my classroom, but what can we do together the next time this happens so that we have a more positive impact and a more positive outcome, and et cetera, et cetera. So the blueprint, honestly, we were just starting to get to the blueprint after 4 years at SUSE because there's a lot of skills that need to be developed. But it is obviously a great place to lead to with your social emotional learning. Next slide. All right, so that's kind of the down and dirty on ruler. There were the 5 skills and the 4 anchors. And as you can see, I think it takes care of, the reason I like ruler is that it has, you're going ahead of me, you got trigger finger again, John. The triangle that I alluded to that Stephanie explained earlier in the New York State document, I think ruler really very nicely takes care of both sides of that triangle. It takes care of the social and emotional side, and it takes care of the academic side by weaving together many of those skills with those 4 anchors. So the ruler timeline, we have, as I've been talking about this whole presentation, we got a grant from the Ed Foundation and support from the Board of Education a number of years ago, and we have been implementing ruler over that time at SUSE. And so this summer, we had a leadership team comprised of 2 principals, 1 director, and 1 board member who received training at Yale. So the first bullet is the 3 SUSE teams have received Yale training over the past 5 years, and those teams have been turnkey training within the building, and that's ongoing. The second bullet is what I just was talking about in terms of our implementation team. We finished training yesterday afternoon, as a matter of fact. And our goal is to offer training to central office, the Board of Education, and all the Port Washington administrators over the next few months. Again, I said it earlier, but we're focusing on adults right now. Concurrently, teams from Daly, Guggenheim, Manor Haven, and South Salem have started training sessions last week. And those teams, I might add, include teachers, administrators, and paraprofessionals. And then those building teams will join SUSE in turnkey training all of the adults in their respective buildings. And then our goal for this year is to have all of the elementary school adults receive training in the ruler approach by June. And then obviously moving on from there, you heard Kitty allude to this in the CASEL document, and you heard Stephanie allude to this in the New York State documents. It's one of the most important things is to build that home school connection. And so, you know, we will be introducing ruler to all of the elementary parents. And again, I know at SUSE, they have been doing this. Meg Sheehan and Jen and the team had a presentation for parents about 2 weeks ago and did a great job. And we will be doing that for all 5 schools. And then we'll start with the kids in September of 2021. And then district-wide, you know, we hope to offer and extend training to Weber and Schreiber in 2021 and 22. And that's our presentation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mioli, Mrs. Klein, and Dr. Allen. I think we're going to open it up for questions now. I actually had a first question that you have answered with your final slide. It's basically the question I always ask at curriculum committee meetings, which is, how does our ideal connect with our practice in the district? But I think you've outlined where we are and where we're going. This topic is obviously really important. And I appreciate the detail that the 3 of you have given to this presentation, because ironically, I think that it's a subject whose importance adults can easily underestimate, quite simply because we didn't go through school like this, and we don't have the same social emotional learning foundation. I feel lucky that my children have gone through SUSE, so I've seen the ruler program in action, and I think it's absolutely amazing. And I attended the SUSE ruler presentation a few weeks ago, and I said there, you know, I watch my children and I think that their emotional intelligence is higher than the emotional intelligence of my parents, higher than my emotional intelligence. And watching a very young child be able to look at somebody else. I'm being told I'm interrupting class. 1 second. Watching them be able to connect. Oh, this person behaved like this. They were probably feeling this way. And I said in that meeting, my kids will do that about my mother. Like, well, she got really upset, but I think what she was really feeling was this. This is, I want to just bring back and emphasize your initial point, Dr. Mealy, because I think it was so important. This is not in place of other curriculum. This is not taking the time of other curriculum. This is so children can learn unencumbered, so that they can be able to move forward and be as successful as they can be and use their gifts to their fullest potential. So I think it's fantastic that we're doing this. I'm under the impression that we are ahead of the curve on this subject over other schools. Is that accurate?
Well, I wouldn't pretend to know what's going on in the whole country or world, but certainly, I think, I think maybe Nora can speak to that too. The session that we went to, the 5 sessions that we went to, people are struggling with the same things that we are. I would say some of them in that one forum were more advanced than we are, and some are not as far along as we are. So I'm guessing we're somewhere in there. But just as a point of information, the entire states of Rhode Island and Connecticut have adopted the ruler approach. And so they're doing it really systemically, starting with the state ed department. And so the amount of resources that they have in those states is significant. But still, yeah, I think we have the SUSE teams have presented at a number of international conferences. And so I think we can modestly say that we're doing pretty well. I also just want to say, since you brought up that the curriculum piece too, I just want to emphasize that Ruler is not a curriculum, even though this is the curriculum committee. Ruler is an approach that supports social emotional learning, and it's the reason that it's on the curriculum committee is because it should, if it's implemented correctly, support and really make better all of the academic stuff that we're doing. It should really enhance it.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. I have a couple questions that are coming in from the public, and I'm going to read those aloud.
Rachel, are you going to take comments from the committee members? I think Deborah had said she wanted questions.
Yes, I will take questions from committee members as well. You know what? I'm going to start with that. I had one more as well, but let's start with the rest of the committee. Go ahead, Deborah.
Thank you. So thank you to all 3 of you for that very comprehensive presentation. My head is spinning and I feel like I'm going to be stuck in blue for the rest of my life because I'm chronically exhausted now. It's actually something I wanted to ask about. Is there a risk that a child who maybe comes from a home environment where they can't get proper rest, who is always feeling tired, but otherwise feels happy and excited to be at school, will they ever move out of that blue quadrant? Is there flexibility in there for the children to, because I almost felt dejected. I said, I'm always going to be in this blue box. Is there flexibility there to have the kids understand that their emotions are not always going to be a certain color? Am I making sense? Is there flexibility within the ruler program to say, okay, well, just because you're always tired doesn't mean you're always going to be in blue? Because I think a lot of children would aspire to be in the green quadrant, and they might not be able to if a certain characteristic is always associated with blue. I'm just wondering about the flexibility of the program and the teachers.
Well, so I'll give you the best answer I can, and then I'll ask our mental health professional, Kitty, to chime in on that one. I mean, in terms of the ruler approach, it's not that you're in a quadrant, it's how you're feeling at the moment. And again, you can be feeling more than one thing. You can be thinking about something that happened this morning that you don't feel so good about, but like really excited about this meeting because it's like amazing. You can be feeling both those things at the same time. And so I don't think of it as being stuck in a box one way or the other. On the other hand, one of the great things about the mood meter when you use it consistently if I'm a teacher and my student is showing him or herself in the blue every morning, that's telling me something. And that's exactly what it's for. That's why we want to ask the question, how are you feeling? And get real answers, not just good or okay. I don't know, Kitty, I think you can probably do better than that.
Am I on mute? Okay. Sorry, I'm having a problem with my computer. So yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that we try to do is, and utilizing the ruler program, is to assess how people are feeling, their emotional sense of being at that moment. And I think when we can identify how students are feeling, and if there is a consistent pattern, that's where we seek out the resources and the support team and the mental health to try to engage that student into, is there something more going on? Whether that be lack of sleep, whether that be some familial circumstances, and really working and counseling that child in the school and having checkpoints. I think being able to feel validated in how someone feels is actually okay. But yes, we want to see varying degrees of feeling tired and happy and excited, and really kind of move around there a little bit. So it's somewhat fluid.
May I ask a follow-up question, Rachel? Are there any privacy concerns here? Because if the children are verbally expressing in class how they're feeling, I'm assuming some of this is very verbal. I don't know if it's written. Well, actually, I guess that's a question. How is this implemented in the classroom? Is it verbal, so that other children are hearing about maybe some potential issues in a home life, or is this written? And if it's verbal, are there privacy implications for the children?
So again, I think if you think about ruler as a way to have students recognize, understand, label, express, and what I leave out, label, express, and regulate their emotions, where, and you think about the triangle that we talked about before, 80% of the students, so most of the kids, most of the time, this is going to be supporting just a check-in, just helping the teacher know the students and know what's going on, and supporting curriculum in terms of the ways that I already showed you. Again, if there is something that's coming out that shouldn't be public, then we go to tier 2. Then as a teacher, I would say, let's discuss that later or at snack time. And then at snack time, I might say, or, I'm talking elementary now because this is where we're starting the implementation. And then I might say, would you like to see Mrs. Bibowitz to talk about that now? And if it's chronic, if it's something that's happening all the time, then we might go to tier 3 and we might ask, for other interventions. We might get the parents involved in that type of thing. So again, it's that continuum of supports, the multi-tiers that Stephanie talked about earlier. And it's also, to answer your question, I don't think there are privacy issues any more than there are anything else that we talk about in the classrooms. A teacher has to monitor discussion and react when something starts to go in a direction that it shouldn't be going in, or that it should be going on in a different form. I don't know, Kitty, if you want to add to that one too.
Yeah, I was going to say, very often students will showcase their emotions in different modalities. Some of it will be verbal, some will be nonverbal. And I think it's a matter of mitigating some of the surprises, if you will, and trying to reflect as a teacher and then co-regulate, knowing that I've been there and I'm in touch with my emotions and I know how this child is feeling. And in the secondary level, it's really obviously not halting the classroom and stopping the instruction, even though you might differentiate and try to pull the student out if it's that significant where the student can't function in the class. But it's really just enhancing the communication between the mental support team and keeping, the family involved. I mean, the first point of contact after speaking to a counselor is, does mom and dad know what's going on, or the guardian? And how do we ensure that there is communication and a network of partnerships in place? So, everything is a challenge, there's no question, but I think it's about, putting up the guardrails in place just to ensure that there is a sense of comfort and safety measures while taking some risks and trying to explore the relationship with the child as a teacher, and then certainly to, refer to a resource person within or outside.
I know Dr. Allen had to leave us, but she spoke about the multi-tiered system of support, and I'm assuming one of you can answer this question. Can you talk a little bit about how those second and third tiers are triggered in our school? And is that something that a parent should be thinking about as well if they see or think they see some additional need for support in their child? And who should they contact if they do see that?
Kitty, do you want to answer that one? I think that's kind of your bread and butter of what happens every day in counseling. She looks like she's frozen.
It's always timed poorly, the phrasing.
All right, so I'll have to tap dance. No, it's oh, she's there. Okay, you there? Kitty?
Can you hear me now? Okay,
Yes.
great. Hello? Okay, great, thank you. So when we're talking about tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, tier 1 intervention is general education. So that means whether a student has been identified or not, a teacher in the classroom will assess their students and see where the students are coming with whatever social emotional competencies in place. When a teacher sees, after working with the student, not that the student has to be identified, but just, what a teacher would do with his or her students, and the interventions in place in the general, arena is not taking into effect to show marked improvement. Tier 2 interventions might be where you're connecting with a support team, your teams. Sometimes the teachers are put on a team where they have common planning prep time so they can talk with other teachers about some of the strategies in place. It could be reaching out to their chairperson, as well as, the school counselor, the psychologist, and the social worker, just to ask questions, in which maybe a conversation with the family needs to take place, and being able to have some kind of a plan that might address some of the concerns in the classroom. In the event tier 2 certainly is something that we're not seeing marked improvement or progress over time, or our benchmarks aren't really showing where we want the student to be, that's when we would go certainly to tier 3. And I think that would be a little bit more formalized, where we would be looking to seek maybe a referral if that's the case, or just really, just having some of the administration in place to find out, where do we go from here? How do we connect with the student? Potentially, one of the things I always, hone in on is every child needs a hero. Every person needs a hero, and trying to see what relationships have already been established within the building, or in outside buildings, where the student has had a connection with a teacher, with a social worker, and being able to find out perhaps that it's not about the student not being able to respond, it's the way the strategies are implemented. So that's how we would build in this tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3.
If I could just highlight one piece there, the instructional support team. I don't think many parents are aware, but we have instructional support teams who meet in every building almost every day, certainly several times a week. And those meetings are especially to follow students who are exhibiting needs, either academic or social and emotional. And long before Ruler, those instructional support teams were meeting and talking about how to meet those kids' needs. And, most of them obviously are in the tier 1 and tier 2. But that's something that's been going on for a long time. What Ruler does is give us a lot of tools and a common vocabulary to talk about them.
And
I believe
I just
Larry
want to
had
add
a
one more
question
thing
as well, and then Deborah. Yeah, sure, go ahead.
I was just going to say, one of the things in the secondary level, just to support a little bit more of the upper grades, is the individual progress review is actually created to build in those social emotional learning competencies and to review how students are progressing year after year. And one of the things that we are implementing already at the high school that we are now transitioning the middle school is through our Naviance program, to work in some of those tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 development. So I just wanted to share that, if I may. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Larry has a question and Deborah has another question.
Yeah, I have a simple question and some more complicated questions. And I'll start out by saying I'm tired and anxious about the geopolitical events. So anyway, so you'll know where I'm coming from when I talk. My simple question is, will the ruler training for parents be done in their home languages? And so that should be a yes or no, I guess. But
Is that the easy one or the complicated
that's
one?
the easy one. So
He's referring to the ease of the question, not
Oh,
the
I
ease of
see.
the implementation.
I'm not sure, to tell you the truth. And I don't think there is an intent to train all the parents. I think there is an intent to communicate, with the parents in terms of what's going on, with the approach. So most of the time when we have presentations and we communicate with parents, we do try, but I think we can do better there, and we probably will have to when we get to that point with this initiative.
all right, thanks. Julie and I have been the past couple of days at the school board convention, and we've been doing a lot of seminars on equity and Central American students and LGBTQ students and stuff, and hopefully we'll get a chance to report on that a little later, hopefully at this meeting later. But anyway, in just looking at this, it does seem to be rather Eurocentric. In other words, when you talk about respectful is very culturally dominant or dependent. And if you look at our suspension rates, we suspend minority students at a very disproportionate rate. And yet, when we talk about it in school, administrators say we do not suspend anybody who doesn't deserve it, and we do suspend everybody who does deserve it, and they don't even see their own implicit bias. So how do we deal with the systemic issues? Because it's great to be able to say, oh, you have to learn to regulate your emotions and not be pissed off. And this might be a student who came from a country where half of his family was shot in front of him. Okay? And you say, you regulate your emotions just like a kid who's been brought up and has never missed a meal in their life. And yet, so how do we deal with the systemic issues and with the implicit bias, not only of the students, but of the staff, which is there? And the only people, if you don't think you have implicit bias, it's proof that you do. So, because you're just not self-aware enough to know it. So does outside of ruler, do we do anything about that? Do we, you provide opportunities for people to develop anti-racism, anti-racist things. You do not require that they be anti-racist. If you choose to be anti-racist, you're allowed to. Is that the message that we want to be sending to the kids and to the staff? So anyway, that's my sort of more complicated question. And this one, you'll probably give me a yes or no answer to.
No, actually, I'm going to duck this one and hand it over to Kitty. No, I'm not going to do that. So I think there's a whole bunch of stuff in there, and I'm not going to tease it all out, but let me tell you this. A ruler is an approach. It's not a magic bullet. There's no, I don't think anybody thinks that we're going to implement ruler and that everything's going to be wonderful and, Port Washington is going to turn into Stepford Wives Town, or whatever it is called these days, and everybody's going to be wonderful to each other. The reason I highlighted the nexus between the program and, anti-racist practices is because it is built in to many of the materials and many of the tools that that ruler has developed. So, I'm going to go back to the very first slide again and say that much of this is process. It's giving us tools and common vocabulary to have these discussions. I think part of what we need to do is have more of them, and it's the process of having adult discussions, as you just outlined, in terms of several things that you appear to be unhappy about. Just guessing, and looking to resolve them. And if you go back to the charter, if you're a kid and you've grown up with charters and you do this every year and you try to figure out what that looks like and how you resolve things when they don't look like what you want them to look like, then by the time you get to, and it was no mistake that I picked goal number 2 in the state benchmarks, goal 2, and in high school, you're supposed to demonstrate how to express understanding of those who hold different opinions. If I remember correctly, your opening few words were that you were tired and cranky or something because you had been sitting in these meetings all day. Imagine what Port Washington would look like, much less the world, if the students had gone through 13 years of having that process and those discussions. We don't tell any of the kids or any of the teachers, and nobody will, what words to put on their charter. But if they put respectful, then they have to look at what that means, just as you said. They may have to have that discussion. What does respectful look like in this environment? And Anchor gives them the tools and the vocabulary to do it. It doesn't provide the answer.
Okay, yeah, again, but it's very student-centered. The students learn to be respectful to each other. But again, you get suspended when a teacher thinks you're disrespectful or an administrator thinks you're disrespectful to them. And so that's sort of where I think the training needs to come in.
Well, again, I know and I don't know how many people out there know, but there's another whole discussion about restorative practices, about how we treat students who do not act in the way that we conventionally expect them to act, or we look at the reasons why they're acting the way they are, and we try to deal with the reasons rather than the action or the reaction. That's another whole separate conversation. It's obviously linked, but I think I don't know how we can argue that having these discussions and having students who know how to have these discussions can't do anything but help address that situation. Kitty, you get the next one no matter what.
I think
Somebody ask a really hard one, okay?
I don't think any of us can top Larry's, but I think Larry, thank you for raising that point. And I know that we're, as a board, hoping to continue our conversation of restorative practices at some point, because of course you're right. I mean, implicit in Larry's question is, we're seeing very clearly the ideal of how it impacts students. You talked about a staff charter as well. Larry's talking about bringing it full circle so that it is about how our entire district approaches emotional health and wellness, and discipline is often part of that, because when a child acts out for whatever reason and at whatever level of school, there is usually something else going on there as well. So I appreciate the very, very hard question, but I think your answer is hopefully we're going to get there, and it will be something that over the next year or two will seep into every school and change our approach to many things, because it is an approach. Deborah, I think you had another question as well, right?
I do. So I understand this was rolled out by state ed in late 2018, and I'm reading between the lines that this is not mandated, that these are guidelines if districts want to choose it. So I'm glad we're being proactive in this and have voluntarily decided that this is what's right for the kids. It fits in with the whole child philosophy that I think we aspire to reach. So I understand that there are kids who are going to exit our education system at this point, not having had the benefit of any of this. But for those who will start to see the benefit, and maybe this was covered, I've heard a lot of explanation about how the kids are being taught to assess their emotions and identify, verbalize, and what the teachers want. And I guess I'm piggybacking on what Larry was asking. Where is the component as teacher between child, classroom dynamic, especially now that we have kids virtually every other day in some of our schools, and some of them always virtual? How, and I hope that doesn't last into 2021, but how can these practices be integrated for those kids who are not in the classroom every day or at any time, for them to be reached so that their social emotional needs are met as well. And I realize we're in the beginning of the program. I realize we're in the beginning of all of this, but knowing where we want to go, is there any foundation that's being laid now in 2020 with regards to those kids?
So since Dave, you said I was taking the next question, I thought I would just be able to respond a little bit, if that's okay. I take these things literal, I'm concrete. So I just want to share that with regards to students who are on fully remote, a fully virtual platform where students are not coming into the brick and mortar, the teachers do have obviously meets with the students. The counselors have also provided some resources, as well as I, to fully virtual teachers so that they can tap into some of the social emotional practices and competencies as well. The counselors are connecting with the students and delivering social emotional lessons to help with the self-management, decision-making, understanding how to be in touch with their feelings. Unity Day was a week ago. 2 weeks ago was Mental World Health Day, and we were able to deliver instruction in terms of acceptance of diversity and differences, understanding how to pocket and kind of cope with confrontation and feelings of, opposition. So there are lesson plans, there are push-in classroom visits virtually. And that's some of the ways that the teachers and the counselors are working with students directly, and also to have support services and resources in place where resources are available on a student's classroom, where students can access even read alouds, asynchronous, aside from synchronous, as well as, some videos and books. I don't know, Dave, if you wanted to add to anything. Or...
No, I'm preparing for the next one. I'm good. Thanks.
I know we only have a couple minutes, but we have additional questions. I have a couple emailed questions, and I know some board members have questions. So I would ask that we try to make the additional board member questions as succinct as possible, but I don't want to cut anybody off. Emily, you're next.
Thank you. Mine is very succinct. And I want to thank you for this presentation. As a board, we clearly share the same goals with regards to social emotional learning for all our students. So, but as a board, what we can do is support the programs. So my question to you is, what do you need from us with regards to, and it's pretty much a budgetary question. So these programs that you discussed, or these initiatives that you are talking about, is there something that we as a board can be doing or should be planning for in supporting or helping to implement these programs? You talked about Ruler going to Weber and Schreiber. Does that have a cost associated with it? Are there staffing needs that you have? Again, I think that as a board, what we can do is support. So I would be curious to know what the needs are.
The needs are the same as always: time and money. So the good news is I used monies from the consolidated grant to send the 4 elementary teams this year. And we may be able to do that again next year to support the secondary. I'm not sure. We'll have to see how things go. There is a second level of training for all groups that may or may not be appropriate in September, depending on how things, evolve. And the other big piece is time. We're having a superintendent's conference day for the secondary on Tuesday. There'll be a lot of, it's the first time since, the 4th day of September where the teachers have, had dedicated time to work together to do anything. And this would be one of the things that obviously I'd like to see them working together on. And also the integration of the social, emotional, and the academic, which probably takes the most time. That's my short answer.
Beth, you have the next question.
Thanks, Rachel. I can be very succinct. We have clearly a role to play as a school district in preventing and keeping kids out of crisis. I can tell you from my time on the street that the number of children we saw in extreme crisis was much higher when the schools were closed, much, much higher. So we play an important role here. My question is, sort of to tag along with Emily's, I know that we just don't have the financial resources at this point to provide the amount of services that our children really need. I mean, that's a blanket statement. We're not going to be able to fulfill all of those needs. And so my question is, what are we doing to build partnerships in the community? I know there's a program through Northwell that some school districts are working with, and some other programs out there. I think one through South Oaks. What are we doing as a school district to try and reach out to some of those resources so that we can bring them to our kids? Because one of the biggest issues that we have here is being isolated, being on this peninsula, access for our kids to some of the critical mental health services is more difficult. Let's just, to put it mildly, especially for our students in need, our students that don't have access to family time and transportation and other things. So what kind of work are we doing to build some community partnerships so that we can get those critical needs met for our students, so that we see less and less kids in extreme crisis?
That was an easy one. So in the not-for-nothing department, as the board has now learned, is my favorite department. One of the workshops, it's a day-long workshop that teachers can choose on Tuesday, is with Northwell, and it is on wellness, adult wellness and student wellness. So there are those partnerships that are being developed, to some extent, not tremendously, but they're starting. And I think the other, the rest of the answer to your question is that that's something we all have to focus on more. I don't know, Kitty, if you have any more specifics, but she mentioned before that we were able to secure 2 guest speakers to come in on Tuesday as well. So there are connections. I know Kitty works with a group as well, and has many connections in terms of sharing resources. I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yes. So one of the things we are, oh, excuse me, my computer just blanked. Can everybody hear me? I'm sorry. Yes.
You're coming through,
Okay.
Kitty.
Yes.
Sorry. Screen just went blank. I apologize. So one of the things we're doing is really trying to build capacity in terms of networking and resources. So the Nassau County Department of Health, we are in close contact. We're always looking for ways to learn about the Up and Up, the latest webinars, what resources are available to our children. Including with that is the North Shore Family and Guidance Center, who has extremely generous. As many of you know, we've sent out a lot of communications regarding some free workshops that if students and families cannot afford, that's okay. And they are available virtually. There were long waiting lists that they actually were able to catch up by getting people to volunteer their time. And so there are no waiting lists. So students who need services certainly can reach out with me as well. On our district website, as well as each of the building pages under guidance, there is a COVID resource page that offers Northwell resources for support hotlines to local Hispanic support groups that are available, so students can actually speak in their native language and seek assistance and support. And as Dr. Mioli mentioned, yes, we're very excited to bring David Heimowitz and Eric Kusin to our Tuesday Teacher Wellness program, but they have been an enormous amount of support for us and a great referral for us. So students who need support can certainly reach out, as well as parents, and we're going to just keep building up that pipeline of resources.
Thank you. I believe Julie has a question as well.
Yes, so I'll be succinct as well. I just want to thank you all for your presentation, which was very well laid out and thorough, of course. Ms. Klein, my question is for you. In one of your slides, you talked about data driving deeper relationship and improving our support. Beyond those one-on-one counseling guidance meetings that we're having, what other data levels are we looking at, and what frequency, and can you differentiate between elementary and secondary levels?
So yeah, so utilizing data to drive instruction. I'm looking at the slide on my paper, forgive me. So yeah, I mean, when we're talking about elevating student voice, we're talking about what ways we can get creative to solicit their feedback, whether it's verbal, whether it's in writing. And that could be certainly through the Google Forms. It could be through the weekly counselor check-ins. It could be from the teacher team meetings. It could be certainly from parent group meetings as well that we have. The data that we use could be with something as simple as classroom feedback, but it could also expand upon a team of teachers, an instructional team meeting, a mental health team meeting, and just different people involved. In the secondary level, one of the things that we are utilizing our data as part of the implementation is trying to get Naviance off the ground at the middle school, because it certainly helps with some of the social emotional surveys that we have available in Naviance. And for those of you who might have had an opportunity to participate in the presentation that was provided last week, there are different individual career plans, as well as individual overview post-secondary plans, as well as career plans of what hopes are. So utilizing data in different ways through Naviance, through the individual meetings, through teacher feedback, through parent feedback, through community partners and their feedback are different ways that we are utilizing that data to drive our instructional programs. For example, if we have during our individual progress review, we have a cohort of, let's just say, our 9th grade students. And our 9th grade students are exhibiting some connectivity issues, particularly as they walked into a new building this year. First year of high school, we know the research says that 9th grade is the most critical time of a student's transition. It's more critical than walking into elementary school and kindergarten. It's more critical walking into middle school as well as college. I mean, 9th grade is a telling year of students coming together and being able to demonstrate the competencies that they hopefully have learned along the way. If we feel that students are having a disconnect to the connectivity of the school, we can utilize that data to say, well, what is it that it seems to be the disconnect? Is it that they're not getting information where they can make independent decisions? Is it that they're interested in particular areas of connecting with career people? Is it more about not feeling socially, emotionally complete? Could it be more about not having a sense of what to expect, a timeline of what they should be doing in grade 9? And so when we utilize that data, we can then customize plans and then communicate that information out. And so that's part of the communication tools that we're using, for example, through Naviance. So I will use like the seniors, for example. One of the feedback points that I received a lot last year as my first year coming in was, we want more communication. It was very laid out, very clear. We need to know what's going to happen before we know what's going to happen. And so when you hear that kind of information, whether it's informal conversation, whether it's kind of like a secondary conversation to the intent of why someone connected with you, you start to think of, okay, now I need to focus my efforts on, you know, kind of getting more hands-on information. So when the pandemic hit, the question is, how do we deliver that type of connection when students are not in brick and mortar, when parents don't feel like they have access to the buildings? And so more virtual programs have been communicated, more type of recording webinars for the parents who are working. A lot of parents shared, I would really love to participate in this webinar. It's offered at a time where I'm working double shifts, whether it's regardless of the diversity, you know, pool of where families are. So we try to, you know, look at more recorded opportunities so that parents are not missing out on information. So it kind of ranges based on what we receive, the data points in writing, what our measurements are showing us, as well as just all data points, really. I'm not a data mining kind of person, but I do know that when information is relevant and there's a relationship between how this can positively impact or help. It's a matter of getting the information out and making sure that all the constituents are involved and aware.
I know we're running over here, but I do have a few community questions, and I'm hoping that you two don't mind bearing with us for a couple extra minutes. They're long, so I'm going to try and make them succinct, and I apologize to the people who sent them in, because normally I would just read them completely out loud. The first question has to do with how we can actually embed social emotional learning within the curriculum, and not having it limited just to, school counselors working with students in the classroom. So the question is, how can read alouds in K-5 and literature choices in 6-12 classrooms focus on growth mindset, processing emotions, sharing experiences, and help students understand their friends and classmates in a deeper way? How can we also look at the race and ethnicity of authors in order to ensure that children are growing their perspectives to see windows and mirrors? Social emotional learning includes our children of color in the district see themselves in literature. When they do not, it's harmful and the curriculum is damaging. I know it's all easy questions this morning.
For the record, you should read their names.
Yes, and this, sorry, I was getting to that, but it's at the bottom and I didn't read the whole question. It's from Kim Alardi, who is a Manor Haven parent.
That's not a short answer. I think I gave some examples in my presentation. I've seen, for example, another great lesson. You can imagine if you are thinking about emotions and trying to have students understand the American Revolution, for example, after reading a short passage, you could have students reflect on, how those who identified as loyalists might feel when the British marched into Boston, as opposed to those who identified with the Patriots. Those types of things, not the New England Patriots. But, there are lots of ways to use emotions to support the curriculum. I think I gave a couple of examples. In terms of that whole big other piece, which again starts going into culturally sensitive and implicit bias and all of those very important issues, I'm gonna say that one of the really the impetus for me pushing to have Ruler at Sousa came from my understanding that our first transgender student was coming to the building at the time. And I just simply knew that I didn't have the tools as leader of the building, and I doubted my teachers had the tools to talk about that kind of thing and deal with it. And that's why I really thought we needed to get some teachers trained. I wrote the grant. And because we're short on time, I'm just going to kind of jump to the end, because there was a discussion about literature. I think the heart of the question was literature and windows and mirrors, I think it was. We, as most of the board members here know, there was a whole very deliberate rollout of library editions in the Sousa Library, dealing at a very age appropriate way with that topic. And it was a great dialogue. It was a great dialogue within our faculty. It was a great dialogue in the community. It was a great dialogue with the parents. It wasn't always a happy dialogue. It wasn't always a green dialogue. There were lots of red dialogues. But again, it gave us the tools and the vocabulary to at least have the discussion. So yes, I think that we are heading in that direction. I think this is an approach which will allow us to do that more often and better.
I think we're seeing also through your answers to these questions and the questions that are being asked, how much this social emotional learning topic and the approach we take has impact in many different areas of schooling. And so I just want to note that these questions that we now, it seems like we're giving short shrift to, are really going to be addressed again, because we are planning to speak about restorative justices at some point, and culturally responsive curriculum and implicit bias and perhaps anti-racism are topics, no matter how you word them, that are on the agenda for the curriculum committee this year. So there will be a future meeting that specifically addresses these as well. I just have two more from the public. This one is from Kelly McMasters. One of the core values of SEL is relationship skills. This is the component most critical for at-home learners. Without those interstitial social moments, snack, recess, lunch, they are deeply depleted in opportunities to build skills in friendships, joy, teamwork, empathy, and cooperation. The only time many virtual learning students see other children is under highly regulated Zoom, Google Classroom sessions in which there's little to no spontaneous interaction. Understandably, chat is relegated to questions on the lesson, and student learning is forward-facing, rarely in small groups, none at all in the 41-person fifth grade class. I would like a clear sense of how the virtual learning SEL curriculum will meet the distinct needs of the virtual learners this year. And again, another easy one, but before I kick it to you, I just want to note that I think that there is a lot of variety in the experience that the virtual learners are having as well. So I think you can answer the question overall, but I don't know that it's necessarily across the board that every single virtual learning class looks the same.
So I'll set the table shortly, and then I'll let Kitty speak about it, because she has, I know, interacted with the teachers and the counselors in very specific terms in that regard. But first of all, you know, again, we'll discuss this at another meeting, but there is no social emotional curriculum per se. We haven't unpacked, you know, skills, concepts that students need to know at different grade levels. It's something that I hope we can start to do, and again, that ruler will give us the tools to do, but there isn't one. And I think that, and I would just say that when, you know, I think all of you know how difficult the opening of school was, and how much in the red zone we all were in education as we struggled with how to best meet the needs of all the students, particularly students who wanted to, for parents who wanted their students to learn totally virtually. And so that school, that opportunity just opened up a couple of weeks ago. And we're working on it, quite frankly. We're you know, a lot of it has to do with the technology. But again, I don't want to sound like I'm making a lot of excuses. You know, there's this conundrum with social emotional learning. As I start to roll this out this summer and in this fall, you know, the last thing people want to do is talk about how they're feeling when you get on a meeting with 20 people and you have a half an hour. You know, it's really important, and I know that better now than I did 5 sessions ago. But the more tense we get, and the fewer resources we have in terms of time and money, and you know, the harder it is to focus on this, because I think still, talk about implicit bias, I think we still all really believe way back there in our brain that this is a soft skill, because that's how most of us grew up. It's not as important as everything else. So really the answer to the question is an acknowledgement that, number one, we have a lot of work to do there. And number two, being totally virtual is harder to make connections than being either hybrid or in person. So we recognize that. We don't have a magic bullet for it, but all of the things that Stephanie and Kitty spoke about in terms of being connected, making relationships, knowing students, all of those things are the things that we need to work on. And again, I think Ruler helps us by giving us some tools to do that, and some vocabulary, common vocabulary.
Thank you, Dr. Mealy. Last one I have from the public is also from Kelly McMasters.
I think Kitty wanted to speak a little bit about.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You know what? I echo everything that Dr. Mealy said. I do want to share that unquestionably it is much more difficult for students to be able to be more socially engaged, and that's understandable. What I will say is one of the things we are trying to do, like for example, I'll just use because I actually observed this, but one of the elementary schools daily, the counselor actually then just one day go in and do a social awareness type of lesson where it was trying to get to know her as a counselor as well as students to get to know each other. She played a game called Two Truths and a Lie. And, with 30 something students, on this, fully virtual, we wanted to make sure that every student had a turn and that they had a safe space to speak about and not feel that their ability to connect with others was shortened. And so her one day push-in turned into a 2-day. And so these are some of the things that we're strategizing and trying to reach with our students on the fully virtual program, because we want students to still feel connected, to still have their voice elevated, and also to still connect with others. So just wanted to share a little example. Thank you.
I actually appreciate that example because I have seen one of my children do that exercise virtually and did not know that that was part of the social emotional learning that was going on. So I'm really looking forward to the future education of parents on this too, so that parents can understand what they're seeing. Last question, how are the virtual high school learners' social emotional needs being met when their academic and technological needs are still an issue as well? What are the plans for meeting the needs of the fully virtual and the hybrid students, especially those students, again, speaking about the high school, who are under the enormous stress of applying to colleges, knowing this semester is intensely important for grades? And that's it. I'm going to stop right there. And by the way, for the people who sent in these questions, I know you gave me many, many paragraphs. I am forwarding these questions in their total to the rest of the board and to all of our presenters today so that they can see the questions, because I know these issues are actually important to them and they're working on them on an ongoing basis. So, but the question for now is about the high school fully virtual and hybrid students and how their social emotional learning needs are being met.
So I'll start, and I know Kitty has a good handle on the whole counseling piece at the high school. But, again, honestly, part of what this is about is an acknowledgement that we need to do more. The high school, from my knowledge, and again, you all know I've been in a position a very short time, but to my knowledge, most of the social emotional learning for the whole school has been, kind of one-shot deals, assemblies, or themes, or that type of thing, which is what most schools do. And so I think, again, one of the things that I'm looking to do in this board and Dr. Hines are looking to do is to have it be more systemic. And so, I wish I could tell you we're doing it now, but we're moving towards that. But we are doing things, and Kitty, I'm sure, can fill us in on some things that are happening at the high school.
Yeah, so I mean, at the high school and, even at the middle school in general, like we are definitely checking in with students. We are doing weekly check-ins with the mental health support. The council actually reaching out with students. Students have actually reached out to us. We've been communicating to them through emails regarding the college process, because I know that is definitely a very big focus given the current state of affairs that we are in. We are doing everything we can to afford student opportunities. We know that the college visits on campus were certainly at a halt. Some of them have now allowed some, reserved spots for students and parents to come on board, but that it's limited. So what we've done is try to include virtual individual meetings at the high school, where I set up a meet where college representatives are available during the day, and they meet with just driver students. So it's not like students will be signing on to a college to meet with a rep, and they're one of like maybe 1,000 kids signing in from England to Schreiber. We're doing everything we can to notify them. We're doing everything we can to notify them of time-sensitive events. whether it's college preparedness, preparing for financial aid, how to market yourself in a competitive pool through the age of COVID. There were several series of that. And we're checking in with our students when students do view those webinars and when we have been meeting with our students who are applying to college, how they're feeling. Most recently, because we are able to see emails going out from the counseling department, we are able to see which students have not, started the college process and making concerted efforts to reach out to them individually to say, we're here for you. It's okay that you haven't started the process, but let's start with a meeting. And so we're making some of those concerted efforts individually and in group measures and grade level communications.
Thank you. I know we're way over, so we want to wrap this up, but I see Beth is saying she has a quick last question, and then Dr. Hines had a comment. So I think we'll let Beth ask her question, let Dr. Hines wrap us up.
Thanks, Rachel. My question actually tags right on to what Kitty was saying. Pandemic times or not pandemic times or normal times, what are we doing to make sure that as our students exit the protective bubble that we have here of a school district where they're receiving services and leave us, that we're ensuring that there's a pathway for some of our students with some sort of crisis-esque needs or have access and know how to access what they need, and that we're sort of moving them on to the next phase of their lives in an appropriate and positive way. Because as we all know, if you look at statistics, particularly here in Port Washington, maybe we don't all know, and I only, but hopefully you all know, the statistics look good for things like the opioid crisis if we look at our high school age kids, but if you look at the 18 to 22-year-old set, not as good here. So, we see more of the kids in crisis with overdoses and other things in that 18 to 22-year-old set. So what are we doing to ensure that there's a smooth transition, between us and the next steps for a lot of our students?
That's a great question. It's something that I've actually given it some thought as I came in here last year. One of the features we have in Naviance that's an added feature is called an alumni tracker that we did not subscribe to until this year. And one of the reasons that was an important piece is wanting to know how students are doing, not when they graduate, and we can get that information through our state reporting and also our internal data, but also how students are succeeding at the college level and are they transitioning and they're staying in college. And so we've subscribed to that this year to help gauge a sense of what the data shows when students leave here and the skill sets that they've developed, whether they're successful in society and thriving in their new communities. The other thing I will share is that there is a graduation survey that I would like to start to look at in terms of sending out to students to see how they're feeling about graduating and moving on and where they feel that they can tap into in terms of resources in the event they feel that there is support that is needed, whether it's at the college level or whether it's within their community in which they're residing. So I'm going to be looking exactly at what you just raised because that is a big focus, wanting to ensure that we're not, kind of like graduating students from backpack to briefcase overnight, but that middle ground of how we make sure that students, if they're going to hit a pitfall, when they hit a pitfall, I should say, that they know that there's places to go, there are resources to access, and obviously there's the school in our department in guidance and counseling where we're still here for our students. So I will be working on that this year.
Kitty, I also wanted to give you an opportunity to plug your transition to college meeting that you did last week with SEPTA, because I believe it's posted. So if you wanted to do that, that would be great, because that is a superb resource for parents that weren't able to attend or didn't know. So if you wanted to mention that.
Yes, thank you. I didn't want to focus on just the special education. I was kind of reluctant. So thank you for prompting me there. So yeah, so one of the things that we offered about, I think last week, like beginning of last week, was the transitioning to college for students with individual needs, but it doesn't really just speak to students who have special needs identified, or I should say individual needs. It really students who may not have been identified as a special education student while they were in the Schreiber community or the Port Washington community. But if a student does have a disability and they transition to college because something just all of a sudden came about, under the American Disabilities Act, students are able to access resources at the college level just by furnishing a documentation that says they have a disability. And so if you haven't had a chance, there was a presentation made by me as well as Caitlin from Adelphi University, and both our PowerPoints are posted under the guidance website under Schreiber. If you go to the link presentations, as well as other presentations that we provided thus far this year, you can certainly access that. And that's another big piece to why it's so important that families understand that the transition doesn't mean just leaving, but it means entering as well, and some of the resources in place that are available still and will continue. Thank you.
Dr. Hines. Maybe he's frozen. Dr. Hines, if you can hear us, you're welcome
How's
to-
this? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. I'm using two devices, so my apologies. I just want to go back to the last community question real quick, because I know we want to tie this up. I want to thank all the presenters. I really think they did a wonderful job. I really, to the best of my ability, tried to sit back and do a lot of listening and learning. So I appreciate it. And as Dr. Maioli said before, regarding Maslow before Bloom, it's really, you couldn't be more accurate than that. You can't synthesize, analyze anything if you're not fed, or if you're, or internally not doing well, right? You can't recalibrate. So it's hard to do those things. So this is critically important. And as I've said many times before, Dr. Peter Gray certainly asserts this as well. We're serving a generation of students who are more anxious, depressed, and suicidal than any generation before, whether it's here in Port or anywhere else. And I think we're highly cognizant of that. But the reality is, this is not just a school thing. And I want to be very clear about that. This is the collective responsibility of everyone. So what it's certainly, it's in our school, but it's with our parents, it's with the agencies in our community, that we have to do all of this together. And I think this is a great first step. And I do think about our students who are learning remotely. I think, the parent brought up some really, really critical points that we're going to really focus on. But that is, again, that's a collective responsibility to make sure that all of our students have what they need and deserve regarding their emotional and social growth. So I just want to thank everyone. Rachel, I want to thank you for stewarding this this morning. This is critically important, and I look forward to our next meeting very soon.
Thank you, Dr. Hines. And apologies to our administrators and to the public. We try to really stick to our hour and a half, and I let us go way over this morning because this topic is so important. So I really appreciate you, devoting the extra time to it as well. Dr. Maioli, I'm going to hand it back to you. I don't know if you have any last thoughts or wrap up that you want to do.
No, I just want to thank everyone who attended, and thank you all for the good questions, and that go back to that word process. We're on a journey, and we look forward to continuing it.
Thank you all. Have a good rest of your day.
I just want to thank everybody for a wonderful meeting, especially our administrators. Thank you so much.
Thank you.